We begin on chapter 17 with the book Russian Sunrise, and it opens Sunday, June the 21st, 2015, at St. Peter's Basilica, Vatican City. As planned, Pope Nicholas had spent Saturday night in the Rome apartment of Father Ignacio Battista, who had a special papal invitation to come to the sacristy of St. Peter's Basilica 2 hours before the consecration, and who was assigned to escort the Pope's old friend, Father Jacob, before setting out at 6 o'clock Sunday evening for their walk across St. Peter's Square and into the famous basilica housing the central altar of the Christendom atop the tomb of the Blessed Apostle Peter. Nicholas permitted himself a brief glance at the Sunday afternoon television news reports. More than 100 cardinals and bishops would be gathering in St. Peter's Basilica for this evening's 8 o'clock ceremony. Of some surprise to the media, Filaret III, the Patriarch of Moscow, had asked several Russian Orthodox bishops to attend as observers. Hundreds of Catholic priests and religious from the Rome vicinity had been granted priority seating, and tickets for lay persons had been distributed on a limited basis, including a lottery to ensure that several hundred, quote, non-VIPs, unquote, could attend in person. Security would be very thorough and time-consuming, as at the most strict airports, so it was necessary for the crowd to assemble well ahead of the 8 o'clock ceremony. The media felt this was understandable. A modest dress code would also be enforced, and there were notices in major Rome newspapers as well as signs posted about the public areas of the Vatican explaining that at this ceremony in honor of Our Lady, there would be zero tolerance for immodest or otherwise inappropriate attire. The media, naturally, took offense at this, claiming that this would discriminate against the poor and those wanting to express themselves in unique ways. Tonight, mused Nicholas, Catholics notorious for their last-minute arrival at routine Novus Ordo Masses would be spending an extended period of time in silence in the Basilica. The Pope had issued an order through his deputy, Father Harold, for holy silence in the Basilica out of respect for the Blessed Sacrament and the solemnity of the occasion. Those refusing to cooperate after an initial warning by the ushers, no matter what their worldly station, would be evicted by the security guards. Ample provision had been made for the worldwide media to televise the event, so that anyone who wished could watch world history unfold in their own home or at their parish church. Media comments were made disparaging the strict recording requirements imposed by the Pope on every participating cardinal and bishop, so that their individual correct participation could be verified after the fact by Vatican officials. There were insinuations that this sort of, quote, heavy-handed tyranny, unquote, had gone out of the Church during the long pontificate of the Pope's predecessor, who had preferred to rule by example and cordial invitation. Now the, quote, sudden end of collegiality, unquote, was lamented, as the College of Cardinals and the National Conference of Catholic Bishops were no longer being consulted for their advice, but rather were being ordered in minute detail as to how they were to conduct themselves in this consecration. Nor was participation optional for any Catholic bishop. It was suggested that, whereas Nicholas's predecessor had learned to operate like a modern corporate CEO, Pope Nicholas was, quote, reverting back to the style of a power-hungry medieval monarch, unquote. Nicholas laughed at the ridiculous rewriting of actual history that had made such vacuous comments seem plausible. He knew that the kind of mind control and mounting suppression of politically incorrect speech which typified modern public discourse was largely unknown and unthinkable until the, quote, errors of Russia, unquote, had begun to spread throughout the world. To be sure, there had been some precedents of outrageous thought suppression ever since the Protestant revolt. Elizabethan England had outlawed the Catholic religion and had subjected those who refused to practice the newfangled Protestant religion to unprecedented penalties for incorrect thinking. The gradual loss of their property through draconian fines for failing to attend Protestant services, and if they continued to resist, then eventually they would face the horrors of imprisonment, torture, and public execution. It was not until 2014, when Prince James, Prince of Wales, and his wife had become Anglican use Catholics, that an embarrassed English Parliament had voted to lift the ban on any British monarch becoming or marrying a Roman Catholic. In Ireland, the occupying English Empire had tried over several centuries to outlaw and suppress the Catholic religion, imposing penal laws that drove the Catholic Irish into poverty and eventual famine, while their English or overlords assumed control of the land and government. It took until 1960 for Trinity College in Dublin to admit its first Roman Catholic student. In the United States, President Abraham Lincoln, who for years had openly advocated that the black slaves be rounded up and shipped off to a Caribbean island as unfit to live among whites, had freed the slaves in the South, but not in the North, as an act of economic warfare and not because he believed in equal rights for them. He began to arrest and jail newspaper editors all across the nation when they publicly challenged his various tyrannical actions violating states' rights and taking to himself powers not granted by the Constitution. Lincoln had even jailed the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court when that justice questioned the legality of Lincoln's actions. Pope Pius IX sent a crown of thorns to President Jefferson Davis of the Confederate States, thereby recognizing which side actually represented the Catholic practice of subsidiary, strong local rule and weak central government, and which side represented the growing tyranny of big money that would learn to benefit immensely from the inherent evils of an all-too-powerful central government. Yet, because history tends to be written by the victors of war, Lincoln had gone on to become one of the, quote, gods, unquote, of the official state religion of the American Empire, with his Roman-style temple in the United States Capitol attesting to the modern theory that might makes right. By the end of the 19th century, papal encyclicals issued forth from Pope Leo XIII, warning against the evils of modernism and also against Americanism, which was essentially an early form of anti-Catholic secular humanism based upon the errors of Protestantism. Nicholas knew that tonight he would be openly challenging the immensely powerful and wealthy secular humanist establishment that ruled the world, like, quote, the shot heard round the world, unquote, with which the poet Ralph Waldo Emerson described the first volley of the American Revolutionary War. The consecration of Russia would unleash a tide of world-changing events that future historians would remember as the night when the restoration of Christendom began. For the final hour before their 6 o'clock departure for St. Peter's, the Pope knelt at Father Batista's prie-dieu and sought strength from heaven. He thought of Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, sweating, as it were, great drops of blood, and he recalled how, when it was over, angels came and ministered to him. Then the dreaded but sweet hour came when the Pope could no longer continue to hide from the world. At 6 o'clock, Father Batista and Father Jacob exited the apartment and walked down 2 blocks of a side street that would bring them out onto the Via della Consolazione, just 100 meters from the opening between the arms of the colonnades that encircled St. Peter's Square. As they neared the end of the block, a small television news crew approached them, one holding a microphone with a logo indicating a well-known network and the other holding a shoulder-style television camera. "Good evening, Fathers. May we have a word with you?" asked the newsman. The camera lens was on them, with a red light illuminated. "Are you going to the ceremony this evening?" "We are indeed," said Father Batista. "Father Jacob and I have been asked to assist in the sacristy at St. Peter's tonight." "Then perhaps you would know something about the whereabouts of His Holiness."